It is Thursday, July 12th, 2018, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I am the host of this program. Thank you so much for joining us here in our New York City studios. Well, your eyes, well, they may deceive you. I don't know. It was Sean Al-Shadi, then it turned into Chuck, and it's back. Yeah, so we have a different panel this time, a new panel, and in fact, we're making history. We have had a woman on the MMA Beat before, the lovely and very talented Esther Lynn, but that was on the road. We now have our very first panelist, who's a woman, in our studios.
All right.
Happy to be here.
Let's get the introductions, so if you don't know who she is. To my left, that's Danny Segura from MMA Fighting. That is Phoenix Carnevale from, let's see, a bunch of different places. You are at Access TV and Everlast.
In Fighting Shape Podcast.
In Fighting Shape Podcast.
And the UFC's Unfiltered Podcast.
Look at that. I mean, she's everywhere. You probably already know who she is. Put a face to a name, though, right? And at the end, you know that gentleman. He is from The Ringer as well as MMAFighting.com. The one and only Chuck Mindenhall.
Yeah, I'm sensing a trend. Last time you flew a guy in from Phoenix, and this time you actually have a Phoenix. This is...
I missed your dad jokes. I really did. I really did. And don't forget, of course, we took your tweets using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We will answer those at the end of the show, so keep sending them. We really appreciate that when you do. All right, fun show. A lot to get to, not a moment to waste. Phoenix, because you are a guest of honor, there's a ladies' first policy on the show that I just made up.
Okay.
We'll go to you first. UFC 226 is in the books. Daniel Cormier, of course, winning the heavyweight and already had the light heavyweight title. There's a lot of different aspects to it, and I'll bring them all up, but let's just start the conversation here. Your biggest takeaway from that fight, from his victory, is what?
For me, personally, it was watching the evolution of Daniel Cormier in a lot of ways. Watching him from Strikeforce to the rivalry with Jon Jones to now beating Stipe. And beating Stipe at Stipe's high point, right? So there's no questions there. There's no questions about what Daniel Cormier can do. Looking at how he's evolved, looking at how he's evolved even with the fans, and how great of a company man he actually is one of the things that I took away from that win. And you know, it's hard because you cannot completely legitimize the champ thing because of the Jon Jones situation. But what can you say? Jon's not around. And Jon's probably sitting there thinking like, wow, Daniel took a lot of the things from me, but it was really something that just happened in the incidences that led up to this. I think we all have gained a new appreciation for Daniel Cormier because it was manifested in that moment. And also talked about before it happened. He said, listen, Stipe makes some mistakes in the clinch. I'm going to capitalize that. We knew DC has amazing uppercuts, that he's comfortable in the clinch, that he's fought bigger guys before. He's talked about all the sparring that he's done with Kane. So I felt like it really was a great moment for him. I jumped up out of my chair. I was super happy for Cormier. And I think it just gave me a whole new appreciation for the level of fighter that he is.
Yeah, it's funny because I think that we've tried to figure out his narrative and his legacy many times on the show. A year ago, we were like, what happens? You just lost to Jon Jones in a second attempt. What happens with this guy? Yeah. What will his legacy end up being? None of us could have imagined that it, like cut to a year later and he's going to have 2 belts. It's almost like such an MMA thing that it could only happen in this sport where something that big of a turnaround, that big of a 180 in such a short amount of time. I, for so long, have kind of coupled him as a picture of perseverance, a guy who just keeps overcoming. Like you go to his backstory, his Olympic story, you could go back to all of his life, and it feels like he's just persevered and he keeps falling forward, he keeps getting up, brushing himself off and going. This was one of those moments where it had that element to it. Like it's like here he is winning the heavyweight title. So you think, how is he here? How is he doing? He returns to the heavyweight title. Now he's a champion. And you see that and you think perseverance, but there was this added thing where he distinguished himself finally because we were wondering about his legacy. This was the distinguishing marker from Jon Jones. Jon Jones has nothing to do with this, you know, and I felt like that was a big deal to see him, how happy he got about that. I know he was kind of talking about it during fight week and everything else. It was just a cool moment, man. It was cool for him. It was cool to see. It had that feel-good something to it that I used to get a lot more when I'd watch earlier UFCs where somebody would do something, you knew their backstories really well. There was some rooting interest behind them. I felt like that was him. Like he kind of brought that feeling back to me a little bit.
Yeah,
you agree?
100% I agree with both panelists here. But from a technical standpoint, I was super surprised at seeing how good Cormier looked at heavyweight. I mean, this is a guy that for the longest time we knew he was undersized at heavyweight, and everyone tried to push him down to light heavyweight. But I mean, the power that he has at heavyweight is not nearly compared to the power he has at light heavyweight. It was just super impressive, the fact that he's been able to achieve so much at light heavyweight and become who he is with, that drastic weight cut. And we've seen really a watered-down version of Daniel Cormier at light heavyweight. That's what I believe. And going up to heavyweight really, really shocked me of how good that guy is.
Is there any way to encapsulate the historical significance of it? I mean, in some ways we can't, because maybe you mentioned a year ago, oh my God, what's it going to look like a year from now? Plus he'll be retired ostensibly by March, right? So it's a little hard to say. But at this moment, can you give any historical weight to it? What does this ultimately mean beyond just what it means for him?
Well, I think you can to an extent. He's certainly now, I feel like you'd be a fool to say he doesn't belong in the GOAT, in that discussion now. I mean, like you mentioned, beating Stipe at this juncture, right when he's his own historical fighter, he just got through Zingano, and we'll talk about them, sure, but maybe really affected Zingano in ways that we didn't even understand at the time. This is a guy on top of his game. For him to do that at that moment was a big deal. There's a lot that goes into the timing of this. He has a chance to sign off maybe 1 or 2 more fights, obviously, and really leave his mark on this game. Just a complete 180 from after, the crying meme that was going out with after the John Jones thing.
Can I just say that was the cruelest meme in MMA history?
I just did a column on Monday, and I must have seen that meme like 30 new times. It's like everybody's still posting it. But just to come back from that sort of thing, I felt like that fight, I remember we talked about at the time, really humanized him as a fighter. Because if you recall, we were always talking about, why doesn't he get more shine? Why do people not like him? Why is he a heel? He's somehow turned a lot of these narratives into positives, and now some people still hate him, but they care about him more. Like, so people who love him really love him. It's like he's done a lot of these things. But his record, getting the 2 belts, even if you want to put an asterisk on the one, that's pretty career defining. I think it now, from a year ago to now, it leaps and bounds. I would have to put him in my top 5 for sure, and I think that he could still finish higher.
I think it's also important to note he's 39 years old, right? And we look at a lot of people.
Meaning what? Like he accomplished it this late?
Yes, against Stipe, right? Like it, and we've seen his power. We've seen him dominate. We've seen what he's done to people. So, at this age, and with the life that he has, the million things that he does, being the commentator, being on Tough, being a great coach, it is kind of amazing. The womp moment for me was then Brock Lesnar I was like, ah.
We'll get to that in a minute. But Danny, what would you say is the historical significance of this achievement?
Just out of the fact that he became one of the very few people to hold 2 titles in different weight class, and the second to hold 2 titles at the same time in different weight class. But I think what's most important here and worth noting is that, sure, that has been done, but what hasn't been done has have a champion defended at both weight classes. Conor McGregor didn't do that, and he's the only one that's done that so far. Daniel Cormier has been pretty open about going back down to light heavyweight, defending that title, and defending the heavyweight belt. I think if he does that, he's 1 step away from making history. He'd be the first to do that, and that's pretty significant.
Let me pitch it back to you then. Yeah. So we had Gustafsson on the MMA Hour on Monday. He was like, give up the belt if you're not going to fight. He was saying he might fight Gustafsson, but
is that like 36 hours later? Give up the belt if you're not going to fight.
He's like, not fighting, but he wants something special. You had the Brock thing, and I want to keep the Brock thing separate for just a second because we're going to get to it. But does he actually end up defending those titles? I mean, the clock is ticking, and you hear him on the one hand, he's like, oh, I want to defend these because I want to make money while I still can. Yeah. On the other hand, he has narrowed the scope of who he's fighting to a point where I don't know that you can do that all that quickly. Yeah. So what happens next?
Well, I personally don't think he's going to drop down to light heavyweight, but I think it's always possible. I mean, he mentioned some interest in fighting Shogun. As crazy as that sounds, Shogun's
I couldn't believe he said that.
Shogun's actually in a pretty good streak, and I
forgot he was still in the UFC. Yeah. Can I just be honest about that? I forgot.
He hasn't fought in a while, but he's been racking up wins. I believe he's fighting Anthony Smith. Yeah. If he gets past him, I think it'd be 5 in a row. So why not? He's
the Hamburg main event.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. 2 weeks to
so right. I think Cormier did put himself a deadline. I believe it was March, right?
March 20th. Yeah.
March 20th. I know it's a personal decision, and he talked about it with his family, but I would love to see him push it back a little bit because he's in such a streak right now. I think if he goes down and fights Shogun Rua and defends his belt there, and then goes back up and fights Brock Lesnar, I think that'd be huge for his career.
Phoenix, what happens next?
We look at timelines, right? Like Brock, that's definitely not going to be able to happen until January. So what do you do until January? You at least want to give yourself some time off. I mean, if we were looking at post-fight press conferences, Dana had mentioned issues with his back. His leg had bothered him. He almost fell. He had all this stuff. So you're going to want to recover a little bit. He did take some shots from Stipe right away. He says that Stipe doesn't hit that hard. But
the hand.
The hands. What is the broken finger?
I'm not sure, but he said it didn't require surgery.
It was really swollen on COVID.
Yeah. So he's got to take a little bit of time. So figure that's 4 or 5 months, or you want to wait until that January fight, get the big payday with Brock, and then have one more until you're out, or it might be one more fight. It really might just be that one more.
Chuck, what's your sense of things?
I mean, my sense of things in the tidiest sense, which never works out in mixed martial arts, would be that he just waits out that timeline, essentially, does the Brock Lesnar fight, because I honestly believe the way that played out, I know some people agreed with the way it went down, some didn't, but I think the imagination opened up a little bit with that fight. It was, there's something to that, a big feel to it. So he does that fight. Ideally, what he does then is he gets that last Jon Jones fight, at that point afterwards. So that would not be by the March 20th deadline. That would occur probably in April or May or something along that. But I think he would make an exception for that particular piece of his puzzle.
Part of me wonders if that Brock fight, because I do think that one is next. I just don't see him going down and fighting Shogun. I mean, maybe he does. I don't know.
After he ragdolled Dan Henderson, I can't imagine anybody would really see a competitive feature to that fight.
Okay, but that's risky, though, right? Just to go down there and fight him at this point. Yes, I would pick Cormier to win, but MMA is crazy, right?
So
wouldn't that be the craziest turn ever? Shogun beats.
that would be MMA.
It's not that I worry this will happen, because I don't mean to worry in that sense, but what I think might end up happening in a regrettable sense is that he'll go and fight Brock, beat him, but make an absolute slew of cash and just say, you know what? Yeah, that's enough.
Yeah, I can
call
see
it a
that.
day.
For sure, I can see that.
2 titles, just made a boatload of cash.
He's the smart.
Done,
He's the greatest everyman there is, too. Like, you can actually get into his head a little bit, because he's a pretty logical thinker when it really comes down to it. So I could totally see a scenario where he does exactly what you just mentioned.
And he's honest. The post-fight press conference, he's saying, like, look at me at my age and my career, who am I going to fight? I'm going to fight these younger guys that are coming up, and probably not. I'm going for the money fights, and he knows that. But if the Jon Jones thing happened to come up, one, that's a money fight, and two, that fight solidifies his legacy if he really gets an opportunity to beat him.
You mean at heavyweight?
Yeah, at heavyweight or at light heavy. So it's that competitor in Cormier that might bubble up. He might have to see how his body feels and go against his logic, because would you want to run that fight again? I would.
Yeah.
I don't like crap talk, but when a rivalry is that rich and that real, it's needed in sports, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, that thing is so personal now.
Yeah.
It is so personal that you almost feel like you're eavesdropping in the awkward sense, where you're overhearing parents argue about something. That's what it's like now. It's gotten to that level where everything is just so personal between those guys. Don't you want to see what happens in Chapter 3?
As the child of divorced parents, you're bringing up terrible memories, Chuck. No, I'm teasing. Phoenix, you had raised something now, which leads us to our next portion of the story coming out 226, which is Brock Lesnar. Now, I'm not here to ask whether or not people like the antics or not. The thing is, the antics are dumb, but they'll probably work, and so that's. Everyone's just going to say, I liked it, I didn't. But they happened, and they will work. Okay. Bigger question for me is about USADA. What do you think it says that this guy came out of nowhere, tested positive, well, I should say after the fact, but the test had happened before the fight, was able to fight, beat Mark Hunt, test positive, skips town, does whatever he's doing, comes back, gets in the octagon. Technically, he wasn't even supposed to be in the arena, but they've kind of fudged it a little bit to make it work, which, okay, I don't even care about that. But that he could have been doing God knows what in that time off, and now he's going to be in the USADA pool for 6 months and comes back. Now, everyone knows my views on anti-doping. I think anti-doping is in desperate need of reformation, and our view that you can do drug war, zero prohibition, is just not supported by the evidence at all anymore. But that's my view. Don't you think this is a terrible black eye for USADA for this to happen?
I do. I think that it's really okay. So in WWE, when these guys do steroids, it's like, okay, whatever. You expect that they're like kind of monsters. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's okay. Like, okay.
I think they
you have a dance partner.
In fairness to them, such as I understand it, they have something called like a health and wellness policy, where I guess they do some testing.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's not like Pride, circa 2000.
Right.
But I don't know that it's as rigorous an environment as, say, the UFC.
It's just strange because you have Cormier say something like, listen, you cannot be considered the GOAT if you have any type of record with, PEDs, and then I'm going to fight and make a huge payday off of a guy who fought a guy and put somebody in danger, and, so it's really, really, it doesn't sit well with me for a lot of different reasons. And then, he just comes back. He comes and goes as he pleases with MMA. And some of it I can't hold against him because of the diverticulitis thing and illnesses. And, he's had legit matchups with great guys, like Mir and all these people that he's fought. And he's had submission victories. So as much as I don't like him, I do want to give him credit where credit is due. But you let a lot of people come back who've been convicted of this from before. A lot of people who, okay, and now you're coming back. And so it's hard to say because it's such a fan-driven, entertainment-driven sport now that people love him, and the numbers show that. So. Me as a martial arts purist, I don't like it, but I get it. There's fans of martial arts and there's fans of the violence and entertainment, and we attend the same events. We watch the same shows.
It's multiple things going on there, right? Like, for one thing, like you mentioned, he probably shouldn't have been in the building, right? Like, and this is one of those other things where people who are suspended are not allowed in the building or anywhere near the cage.
So my understanding is if you're suspended, if you're in the USADA testing pool, you have to, during that portion for him, that would trigger his suspension.
Right.
And so in that portion, that's where he is ineligible to even attend events, or corner or whatever.
And then much less inside the octagon, challenging, because this is basically this guy wrapped in red tape right this moment. He has to go through the protocol still to even be in there.
Right.
A little premature, but then we're dealing with a guy who has dealt in nothing but exceptions, right? Going back to his fight with Mark Hunt, he was given an exception to do that fight. It backfired. Here he is back. Now, you could look at all of that and say, like, you could point out, like, that's really ridiculous that this guy should be able to even do any of this, because that is not the way, that's not the precedent. We've seen other guys who can't, the Barnett issue, all those guys, they're not able to do these types of things. But then, you hear about the numbers. You hear about these things, those last couple of numbers, and suddenly you're like, why wouldn't they be trotting out Brock Lesnar and trying to make the biggest deal possible out of something? Because honestly, that got people. I was getting Bill Simmons, who was actually at the fights. He's like
name dropping.
Well, I mean, I don't hear from him unless it's something like big like that. And he's like, Lesnar, like he's going on. I'm like, that's why. That's when all of a sudden you realize there's a new vibe to it. And I gotta admit, man, every time Brock Lesnar does come around, it's pretty cool. You could take all the.
So you don't care that much.
I mean, I'm with you what you're saying about. I have to divide it at all times. We've talked about this a million times. This is not a playground for, PC minds. It's not a. We bring together so many different elements. You have to be able to look at everybody like kind of askew and to see them in whole. You know what I mean? Like, you can't. Brock Lesnar has an asterisk. There's a million guys with asterisks. You know what I mean? So I kind of look at it like as a boon for the sport. I want the sport to have big fights. And Daniel Cormier, there's something about that lead up, that combination of guys that makes me happy.
I'm all in for this fight. But I would say probably the biggest black eye goes to the UFC rather than USADA, because at the end of the day, they brought Brock Lesnar to the cage, right? They set this whole thing up. Dana White was talking about how the UFC wanted to make this fight, and from my understanding, the UFC was the one that waived off the 4-month period, right? The first time. So, and yet they're promoting his comeback, and he's a guy who failed the test. So, I think the biggest black eye is on the UFC, because they're somewhat agreeing with this. They're somewhat letting this go by promoting him and pushing him. So I think that's where it goes. But regardless, I'm all in for this fight.
Yeah, I don't care at all, even a little bit. If you're about the anti-doping implications, and even if you do, look at Daniel Cormier. Do you think Daniel Cormier knows exactly what he's getting into with this? Are you kidding me? Do you think he's like, well, I hope he's just eating his Wheaties? I mean, I think he wants him to pass all USADA tests during the 6 months so they can make the fight happen. Fine, but I guarantee if you sat down Daniel Cormier, and I don't want to speak for him, but my hunch is that if you were like, do you think he's clean? His answer would be, who cares? I'm going to get paid. And by the way, clean or not clean, I favor Daniel Cormier to beat the brakes off of him. So it's like, if you're, why would you possibly care about this? I couldn't imagine a reason.
And he kind of has a sense of humor around that. When he was talking about when Brock Lesnar
he's strong.
He's strong. And he's laughing about it. So I don't really think he cares. And I think if you're a true MMA fan, have been watching the sport, there's a blueprint already. Cain Velasquez said it out there when he fought Brock Lesnar. So, why Cormier should be able to do the same thing.
So Chuck, let's go roundabout here on 226 and ask the following question. You look at the TV ratings, it did not do all that great for the prelims. It did about what 225 did, just south of 700,000 viewers, although the peak may have been a little bit higher. And then pay-per-views, they said early estimates were sub 400,000. Let's just say for the purposes of this conversation, 4.
Right.
Okay, which is about the low end of what you had told me on MMA Hour, which is interesting. Not bad numbers. They still made money. In fact, they've made a lot of money. But Chuck, why were they underwhelming?
I don't know. To be completely honest, I think it's just a trend. I mean, we've seen numbers coming back each time at this, and I don't know if this is. You always go back to the crescendo of having Conor McGregor and what his numbers. So now we compare it to these astronomical numbers. I don't know if there's just some big letdown now where no star seems to match that star quality, especially like with Ronda Rousey was floating around back then, and John Jones. You take those 3 guys. I don't know if it's just that nobody else can actually get to that type of buzz. I don't know if it's because Miocic, big in Cleveland, but he wasn't the biggest name in general. Like, casual fans weren't really paying attention. Daniel Cormier and him were not exactly going at each other, in the lead up to the fight, even though they did the whole tough season against each other. You had the Max Holloway fight actually fall out. I thought that actually might be the bang for the buck. That was the hook. I mean, you get that fight on top of the other one, and it felt like an automatic pay-per-view. I would love to have seen the numbers if that fight had been on there, just to see how that would have skewed it. But ultimately, man, you wonder about, like, sometimes they stack these cards really nicely, but you wonder how much it ultimately matters. If it's just coming down now to the guy at the top, one big seller, if just people are looking at these cards differently. Because I remember in the old days, if you had one pretty good fight at the top, like something at a title fight, say, and then you had maybe 3 kind of compelling fights in the division or separate divisions, you would be like, this is an awesome card. I feel like these days, collectively, we're not really looking at it that way anymore. I don't know why, because this card I thought was the best one of the year by far, even without the Ortega fight. So I thought those numbers, honestly, I thought those numbers would be over 500, just from looking at it, even without Ortega, Holloway. So I was a little surprised that they were that down.
I had it around 450. That's what I said, maybe a little lower. But I was surprised because even we had Sean Rashadi and Mark Ramondi in the scene, and they just talked about how it felt big.
It did feel. I was there too. It was big.
Yeah.
And just that card was stacked from top to bottom. And even without Holloway Ortega, like the lineup, you read it, it was a pretty stacked card. So I was surprised about the numbers, and I wonder if it just became that Conor McGregor is the only guy that can get there, because this was a super fight. So maybe this speaks to larger issues about promotion of the fight. I don't know, but I was pretty surprised with the numbers. We'll have to wait and see what the final number is. I do want to hold on that, but I mean, they said it was a little bit over less 100. That's what MMA Fighting reported. So we'll see, but definitely disappointing numbers.
There used to be like a baseline, essentially, right?
Yeah.
For like what?
350.
350? And it's crazy.
3.
It's crazy that that's barely above the baseline, That's what's alarming about it, I guess.
I think I'm going to say the same thing that everybody says. I think it has a lot more to do with the oversaturation, because when I first got into this sport, we used to have these UFC parties, and it was, once a month. Right. Sometimes you didn't even care who was on the card. You just knew you were going to watch fights, and you got everybody together. And then now it's just, it's almost like being in a relationship where you see the person every day and you don't really miss them because there's a new fight on all the time. And so it doesn't really matter how great they are or how pretty they look that day. It's more like, okay, well, I see you all the time, so I'll catch the repeats, I'll catch the this and that. But sometimes when you miss something or you have something to look forward to and there's not like who's fighting, and that's how casual fans go. And I also completely believe that it was Holloway and Ortega, because so many of my own friends or people that I work with was like,
right.
I really don't care about it now because it's such a letdown. People were, for me, even personally, that was the fight I've been looking forward to the most this entire year, because those were 2 guys who completely deserved the position that they're in, and we were building up to that.
Right.
So I think that left kind of a sour taste in everyone's mouth, like, because that was the first reaction everybody had. And I really think that has a lot to do with it.
It's that fight because of the momentums too, right? Because we used to get that every now and again where these 2 guys couldn't be at bigger moments of their careers colliding. That was an awesome thing to to think about. I also think it's because of all the fights that go on, but hardly ever do we get into a fight week where something is not altered. These days at the last minute to change it. And at some point, that stuff it just feels like the sport is doomed when this stuff happens. Like, you know, every time you get to a fight week, you're getting, let down. You know, it's like the sport there's a letdown factor to it now.
I have a few theories about, like, the fact that we put these fighters under just tremendous strain. I've aired them before. I don't want to bring them back up. There's a different way to look at this if you want to, which is what's the most Stipe Miocic could sell as a headliner, period. Right? Now, you could say as a headliner versus Overeem, they did 450, but that was CM Punk also on the card. I'm talking about not having that. You're carrying the show. What's the most you could imagine? You'd probably say about 400,000, to be quite honest. Not named if he wasn't fighting like a Lesnar or something. So part of me is like heartened by that fact because that's actually a pretty good number considering that I think Stipe is quite beloved and you could feel it on the ground, trust me, but just not necessarily a dynamo when it comes to the box office. So for 400K for Stipe Miocic, I'm like, not that bad. Because of time, I do want to move along here. I at least want to get your ideas about that. The other part I wanted to talk about is now past that event. You mentioned Brian Ortega and Max Holloway. So Brian Ortega got out this week and discussed, I guess he wanted to be reimbursed or something to be given back to him because he showed up to fight week. He was there at the open workouts, put on a show, and then the very next day the fight's canceled. And his argument was like I spent all this money. I did everything you asked of me. I was ready to go on weight. I was did all the media and then some, and everything you could possibly ask, he did. But then I begin to think of it. I think he's half right, and I think he's half wrong. Here's my question, Danny. I'll pitch it to you. I can't think of a single promoter in the entire combat sports space, not one, that will pay you for not fighting. I don't know who that is. I really don't know who that is. It's not Bob Arum. It's not De La Hoya. It's not Eddie Hearn. It's not Dana White. None of them do it. So to me, it's like that's one lever to get paid. The other lever to get paid is to have it written into your contract. Yep. But I don't think that happened either. So lever one, not happening. Lever two, not happening. The third question I would ask, and maybe the answer to that is yes, is sign your Project Spearhead card. That's a long-term play, not a short-term play. But I'm having less and less sympathy for people who don't want to do that. Yeah. What am I missing about this argument?
Nothing at all. I mean, I've seen on Twitter people come out and say like, oh, the UFC needs to pay Brian Ortega, but do they? Where does it say that they need to pay Brian Ortega? It doesn't really, and I'm all in favor of fighters making more money, of course, and I do think Ortega deserves to make more money. Obviously, he put in the work, he went to the media events and all of that, but at the end of the day, you need to have that on your contract. If you don't, it's kind of hard to argue with the UFC. Anything that the UFC gives you past that, it's just a bonus, really, because they're not entitled. They don't have to give you that. So I do feel bad for Brian Ortega. Of course, I was looking forward to that fight. I feel bad for all the fans, for everyone who bought tickets. But at the end of the day, if you don't have that on your contract, it's hard to, come out there and demand those kind of money. I hope he's going to sit down with Dana White, I believe, and figure things out, whatever that means. But hopefully he gets some compensation. But I mean, you can't blame the UFC. It's nowhere written that they have to do this. So, they're a company, they're a business, so they won't.
Phoenix, do you agree?
I have mixed feelings about it because fighting that night isn't the only part of your job. It's all the preparation that goes into it to that night. So you should get something. You really should get something. You are being a company man or woman by doing all the media, all the press, showing up to all the stuff, wearing all the stuff, doing what you need to do. But yeah, that should be a part of your contract as well, and maybe some type of stipulation. They could also make that contract really scary, like, well, if the person that you're signing to fight doesn't fight, then you have to fight anybody that we tell you to fight, and you want to wound up with Stevens or whatnot. So,
of course, he would have gotten his full purse, though.
Right, right. So it is kind of like a very iffy situation.
Chuck, where you come down on this one?
I agree with you 100%. You can view it either way, but the bottom line is, man, he was the professional in the situation. It was no fault of his own that Max Holloway fell out of that fight. So if you just look at it from a black and white sense, the big issue is that people are like, hey, he did that. The UFC, maybe it's not in the contract, but there should be some kind of moral or ethical obligation that says, hey, we should compensate him for something because it was not his fault. It's a judgment call on those types of things. I would like to have seen that because I feel like we've talked about this a few times now where something happens. I know that Ian McCall was in situations. There's been multiple others that we've discussed on the show. Like they get to fight week, they do all of their due diligence. They go through the process, they make the weight, whatever it is, and then their fight doesn't happen, and then they're complaining about not getting their pay. Somebody has to. I agree with you. At some point, there's got to be some kind of pro-action on this. So either you're going to have to, sign your name on and get involved, or you got to start doing these contracts differently. That's the only way to do this because I understand 100% Brian Ortega's frustration, and if I did it, if I went through all that process, if I spent time on a camp and had a guy in my crosshairs for 2 months that I'm training on and a goal that you're trying to get past, and you get there and you're that close and then something like that happens, that sucks. Because the one thing that you want to happen is if you're ready, that you get your money if nothing else, right? Like it's prize fighting, so you get your money if nothing else. So it's very tough. It's tough. I can understand fans being like, "Oh, you should be paid," but it's more so just based on like good faith, right? Like we know that you did it. We should do this ethically.
Right. I mean, I'm with Phoenix on this one. It's written into the contract. Remember, this is why. So I was putting up the part before where I disagree with him. Let me tell you the part where I do agree with Brian Ortega. You raised it in the contract. This is why Conor McGregor had loggerheads at UFC 200 when he was originally supposed to be a part of it. He was like, you have to do a reasonable amount of promotion. Well, what does that mean? Well, they don't really say until they have an issue with it. But the point being is that is a duty in your contract, not merely just fighting. You should be compensated for that. You should be compensated for doing promotion. And it's never in their contracts. And I don't know why. I'm assuming it's the UFC doesn't want to be leveraged. My hunch is, though, these elite fighters, man, if you're in a UFC main event or fighting for a UFC title, so let's say a co-main event in this case, and the opponent falls out the week of the fight, you should get half your show money, I think. I think that should be written in there every single time. You shouldn't get your full purse, because what they did was they offered him Jeremy Stevens. Well, that would be your opportunity to get a full purse. But I don't disagree with Brian Ortega for saying no to that on short notice. That to me makes sense. But to walk away with nothing? Yeah. To walk away with nothing? That to me seems insane. But at the same time, are these fighters going to do anything about it? The media has aired the story ad infinitum.
I know.
Nothing changes. We are not the cavalry. The cavalry is not coming. It's up to them. So I wish that there was some way to get him paid. Maybe they will in the end. They said they're going to figure things out. Maybe he'll end up with Stevens on the August card. Fine, that'd be great, you know. I'd love to see him get paid. I'd love to see him fight in his hometown.
The other thing is, and we've talked about this too, they do budget. Obviously, they're already budgeting going into the fight. This one is very specific because we talked about how it probably affected the numbers, the overall numbers. But they've already budgeted the fight that somebody's going to be, that those two guys are going to be paid this amount of money. This is what we're going to put out there. What is the difference, honestly, like when it comes down to it? If you're paying half of somebody's purse, I don't understand how that hurts the UFC ultimately. You know what I mean? This particular one is a little weird because this might have affected the numbers to a bigger degree than other fights. But a lot of these times, these guys are making like something like 40-40 or something like that. And you're like, can't you? I mean, you had that budgeted. That was going to be spent either way, you know?
To play devil's advocate here, I don't necessarily agree with this point, but necessarily, you know, if the UFC, say, reschedules Brian Ortega to fight just a month later, I mean, they would pay his entire purse just 30 days down the line, plus whatever they paid him. So I can kind of see where they're coming from as far as that end. Hopefully, either they give him a date that's, you know, pretty close, or they give him some sort of compensation. But that's it.
If they're going to run it back quickly, which won't happen, obviously, because of Holloway. But, I mean, if they're going to do something like it's just being pushed back, you could understand the OC's stance on that a lot more.
A little bit, but I will say a fighter is a nucleus to a whole bunch of other things. Nutritionists, chiropractors, trainers. There's a lot of people that when you fight, you also have to pay. You know, so we have expenses. That's a big part of the job, the expenses that they also need to pay out. So I think that there should be some, you know, even if you're just looking at it on an hourly basis. Well, you spent this many hours to do this interview, that interview, or to travel to this place and that place. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me.
So let me pitch it back to you if I can. I want to move this along because we're still talking about UFC 226. There's so much that came out of it. I want to get to the fights that are coming up this weekend. But for the moment, Francis Ngannou took to Instagram after the fight and said he took the fear of his last fight, which was against Miocic, into this one against Lewis. Now, I talked about this in my radio show, and some callers had speculated, well, maybe he was talking about the fear of getting tired, because when he got tired, it just essentially immobilized him. But then I spoke to Derek Lewis personally, and Derek told me, no. That dude, he goes, the way he looked at me at the weigh-ins and the way he was looking at me when we were throwing punches was totally different. Now, I don't judge Francis for that. He is a human. Humans respond to the world around them and how it has affected them. My question is this, and I raised it and people got indignant, and maybe if I'm wrong, please tell me I am wrong. But that made me think about the question of cornering again. Now, I went back and I watched the Miocic fight. It's not an obvious thing, to be quite honest with you. He gets beat up real bad in the fourth round. If you recall, all three judges had it 50-44. The fourth round was bad. But at that point, they sent him out to the fifth, and he just didn't do a whole lot at all. And I'm wondering if they maybe should have pulled the plug by then. Here's my question. We're talking about this situation several UFCs ago, UFC 224 with Raquel Pennington, and that was a little bit clearer because she said she was done, and I realized I had a debate. What is the right answer here? Because people might think I'm blasting his corner from that Miocic fight, and I'm not. I don't know what the right call was. And in fact, his corner, do they have any history of making bad calls? No. However, look at the result now.
Yeah.
What lesson do you take from MMA cornering based on what Francis has said?
I don't necessarily blame corners because corners aren't registered psychologists, right? They understand the fight world and they understand fight psychology to a degree. But sometimes you can't figure out why a person's not performing, why they're not pulling the trigger, why they're not fighting back. If this is so deep in his psychology, that's who he needs to talk to. He needs to talk to a sports psychologist. The corner is responsible for making sure that you don't get brutally damaged, but we also know how many fights have we watched where somebody comes back out of nowhere, or how many fights have we watched where a guy just gets like mauled and then comes back? Look at someone like a Frankie Edgar, who's been in war after war, but he's mentally always 100%
He
all
doesn't start
good.
coming to life until he's bleeding.
Yeah, he's all good mentally. He's still always very competitive and sharp and easy to talk to. So I don't necessarily think it's a cornering thing, even though I think corners should definitely be more responsible at understanding the damage that MMA athletes take. Understanding, sometimes it's a fight mentality, right? You never want to give up. You never want to throw in the towel for a guy because you don't know how that's going to affect him either, or affect his career, or how people look at him or think about him. I really think that fighters need to take the initiative within themselves to figure out what's going on. And I like the fact that he addressed what's going on with him. And I think that a lot of the times they come in super hot, and then the pressure is just, it's a lot. I like to watch people grow. I like to watch somebody's evolution and their maturity. And I think that I don't necessarily blame the corners, but I think fighters should have a good grasp and handle on their egos, their emotions, and PTSD, which can happen in not just combat situations. It happens in the cage as
trauma,
well.
any kind of trauma.
And I feel like the corners, in a lot of times, especially in this case, are learning about their fighter just like we are in real time. Yeah. Like, the bottom line is, going into that fight, how many first round knockouts did this guy have? He hadn't been challenged really. It was almost like the John Jones thing back in the day. We're like, well, yeah, but does he have a chin? Can he take a punch? We had to wait to see that, and we understood that he could take a punch at some point, and especially in that Gustafsson fight. You know what I mean? Things like that. His story had to unravel in real time. That's what made him a great champion in that sense. Zingano was one of those guys who was just getting praised, but we only knew really from him from a very dominant standpoint. So as that fight unfolded, and I remember the fourth round, I was sitting there watching that, and it was pretty brutal. I wondered if he would go in for that. But there was still a sense of like, yeah, but he's still got that power. If he goes in that fifth round and he lands one shot, this thing could still be altered. I feel like it's just very tough to gauge a guy of that magnitude. They were putting so many eggs in that basket, giving him that spot. I think that everybody in real time was like, we want him to be invincible. You know what I mean? To an extent, we want him to be the star. They wanted to give him every chance. And that's why it was so shocking, honestly, to see him come out and basically lay that egg against Lewis.
I think cornering obviously is a huge responsibility, and maybe the cornering that went down in the Stipe Miocic fight could have influenced the way he felt going into it. But I also want to point out another aspect that perhaps many people are not talking about, which is tune-up fights. Yeah. I mean, going from Stipe Miocic to Derek Lewis, who's a killer, that's pretty high level, especially coming off after a big loss. Maybe, the cornering wasn't that great, but how about the team go back and be like, hey, look, we're not fighting Derek Lewis. This is a scary striker that can put people to sleep. My guy needs some confidence. Let's get him a tune-up fight. So, I don't think
they do, though. This is again why I don't want to put the corner in a tough spot.
Right,
I think,
or the team, or
all the indications through all of the stare downs and everything was that he was ready to go, and then once he got to the cage, it was totally different.
Well, even if you were in the team and you're getting all these signals that your guy's there and he's super confident, wouldn't you want to just make sure and get him, a tune-up fight?
Here's a problem, and I agree, it's a great point. Here's a problem, though. If you look at the rankings, he lost to Miocic. He dropped to number 1. It's like, how do you lose 50-44 and you're the number 1 contender? How does it you keep that spot? That seems absolutely insane to me. But what it does is it keeps them in that space where the only guys you're gonna fight are the Derek Lewises or the Hunts or whatever.
It should be a ladder. If you are at the top and you lose, you go back to the bottom. But fighting, especially after losses, there's guys like Frankie Edgar who has the Ortega loss, brutal loss, but comes back and looks like a killer.
Yeah.
So you never know, but that's part of being the team. You know, sometimes you want to be conservative in certain matchups, and they definitely gambled with this Derek Lewis.
And the expectations on him. This fight, when it was made, seemed like one of the great heavyweight fights. Like, it was like, for non-title, it seemed like one of the great, like, oh my God, this thing goes a minute and a half, I'd be surprised. Somebody's going to get knocked out. That's how it felt. You're looking at this fight and you think, like, these two titans are going to collide and somebody's going to fall. Zingano knew this too. He's known about his own hype. He might have bought too much into it. And those expectations somehow, like, this is what made it very, very odd theater as it was playing out, because you're like, what has happened? It was almost like we all had to collectively say, like, what is going on in his head more so than Lewis's? Because I felt Lewis was just trying to measure something up the whole time. You know, like, okay, wait, I'm not going to be stupid. I'm going to wait it out. But what a strange, it's just such a strange thing. And I guess this goes to show you once again, you just don't know from fight to fight if something, you know, when guys give a piece of themselves away.
I would say, though, if a guy is 10 fights or so or less in his career, I'm not sure exactly what the number was at the Miocic fight, but it was still very early in his career. Less is probably more. A little caution, fight over fight, especially after a brutal 5-round loss. And now I think we should go forward with that informed judgment. Now, let's look forward, if we can. Yes? You know who's back in action this weekend?
Who?
Wayne Rooney at DC United. But we're not going to talk about that. What we're going to talk about is Junior dos Santos. Junior dos Santos, Chuck, is back in action. He's got a main event. USADA issues behind him, for lack of a better description, such as they can be, I suppose. They never really are, right? Once you get branded. But in any case, he's facing Blagoy Ivanov. I don't care so much about that. He's ranked 8th in the division. His last fight was against Stipe Miocic when he got knocked out in Dallas. What do you expect from him? Is he still a player in this division?
I feel like
Who is he?
I don't know what to expect. I feel like this is one of those fights, it will tell us a lot. You know, it's been, what, 2.5 years since he last appeared? And most of his fights he's had recently, like something like 4 or 5 of them were wars. Like the type of thing where he either was knocked out or he was, you know, going toe-to-toe in that first Miocic fight, for instance. I mean, like, just a brutal fight. What does he have? I don't know. I know that the guy, you know, he's always, you talk to him and he really believes in him. So I truly believe when he tells you something, you get a real indication of what he thinks and what he's going to try to do. But I feel like this is the great drama of this is what version of JDS do we get? It's a perfect kind of opponent for him, I think. A guy who, you know, the guy's been around. Blagoy's been around for a long time, but I think it's the perfect kind of guy who isn't super quick and super powerful in those types of things that's going to, you know, do something scary to him right away. So I feel like this would be a very good gauge. But that's the drama for me is what form do we get JDS out there?
Do you still want him? Like, does the fans want him to be a big power player?
Well, I'm speaking from personal experience. I really like him. I do want to see him back. I'm almost glad for the 2 years that he's been gone, so he can recover. He can come back strong. He has his head together. He can clear his name too, because once you get popped, it sticks with you whether you were cleared or not. And, you know, he said something, and I don't know if it was the interview was with you or with you.
Not me.
But I remember it really distinctly, and I agreed with him 100%. He says, when you win a fight, you move forward a little bit. But when you lose a fight, you move back a lot. And I think we forget, you know, how good he truly was, that he beat, you know, Kane the first time until that big loss to him, that he does have excellent boxing and great speed and all those type of things.
Beat Stipe.
Yeah.
First time, anyway.
It's the first time. So I think it's good to have him come back, and maybe for the 2 years that he's out, we've acquired a whole bunch of new fans, and they'll see him for the first time, and it might be a resurgence for him. And I hope that's the case, because he was one of those guys in the sports that we love, easy to talk to, you know, just a really good fighter, a really nice person. So I have my fingers crossed. I think this is, like you said, a very good fight for him. That guy's a sambo guy. He's got good sweeps. He's got good trips, but he throws with reckless abandon. Junior could capitalize on that.
Nobody has had a harder group of fights than him. I mean, you look at his
Blagoy Ivanov?
No, JDS.
Well, the dude got stabbed and somehow made
that's a big fight.
It's like neither guy has any walk in the park.
No, but I mean, JDS, you just look at who he's fought, and, you know, multiple times with Cain Velasquez, a couple of times with Miocic. I mean, you know, Overeem, Hunt. It's like all those fights, you just look at them and you're like, man, nobody has done, like, I know we always joke around like the heavyweight division, and so many guys are like either 40 years old or right around that age. He's only 34, but he seems like he's that old. He seems like he's been around that long. You know what I mean? Because he's not had like an off, like where he gets a little patsy in there somewhere just to give him some confidence. He's never had that this whole time.
Yeah, I want to see him back from a technique standpoint. if you look at, say, like a guy like Chuck Liddell, he was losing towards the end of his career, but he always kept the same style. He would charge forward and look to knock you out. So you go, okay, you're doing the same recipe. How do you expect any change? But with Jay Diaz, we saw in the Miocic fight, I know he lost, but he's not the same guy that fought Stefan Struve or that knocked out Gabriel Gonzaga. He's not going in there to piece you up. He's using a lot of movement, much like Alistair Overeem, who reinvented his style and had, extended his career.
Right, became something of an outside fighter.
He's, he's sticking and moving, using a lot of movement. He's got great footwork. And Miocic, he's really the best, one of the best heavyweights in the world. So we can't really blame him too much from that loss. Plus the USADA, I think, although it tainted a little bit his career, obviously just the fact that, people brand him as a cheater, even though he's not. Did give him some extra rest, some extra health, so I think I do want to see him come back because I feel like his style plus the break, plus he's reinventing himself. I'd like to see him get a shot.
Danny, I'll go back to you one more time if I can. What about Kat Zingano? She also fights this weekend against Marion Renault. Marion Renault has a win in 2018. Kat Zingano hasn't won, I think, since beating Amanda Nunes.
Yeah.
Wait, UFC 178, something like that?
What a win, though. That's what's so weird about her.
What a sensational win. But this is my point. So I was going back and I was like looking at her timeline. She's dropped 3 in a row. Now physically she looks all the part. Like I don't see any noticeable change, right? But it just I don't know what's happening. Is she fighting tougher opposition? I don't know. So she lost her husband tragically in that suicide. I think she fought in September, and that happened somewhere around December or January, something like that. And I don't know that she ever recovered from it. And certainly as someone who has had a loss like that, the suicide loss in her family, I don't know that I have ever recovered. Was it 15 years later, right? You're just never the same. But at the same time, she's training with a good team. She made the move to Alliance, and she has a tough fight against Marion Renault, man. Like, what are the stakes this weekend? If you ask me, they're huge for her.
It's her career. I mean, she was undefeated, and then now she's on a 3-fight losing streak. This is it. And she's been fighting really tough opposition. I think her last bout was against Kaylin Vieira, who's a top.
Yeah, she's not fighting scrubs.
No, she's
to be
not.
clear.
So, Renault is a legit. Don't get me wrong, but we can agree maybe she's a step down in competition as far as the Amanda Nunes, the Kaylin Vieira. So I would like to see how she looks. I'm not ready to write her off. I think she has a lot of potential. Physically, she's one of the strongest at that weight class. She seems like she wants to get back in there. Her mind is still there. So I want to see how she looks, but this is definitely a career-defining moment for her.
What do you think, Phoenix?
She's still ranked number 6. Renault is 41 years old, I believe, and Kat's still ranked number 6. She's still up there. She still has very notable fights. I think she's still fresh in a lot of fans' minds because when the women's division first came out, she was one of those things that it was a big forefront. I think a problem is a little bit with the style of how she fights, where it's very sporadic. I think even though her fight IQ is good outside of the ring, she could watch fights, she breaks them down. She's actually a really good instructor as well. I think when she's in there, there's emotions and maybe she's not seeing things and we're not setting things up. She had been a late starter and then she comes back second, third round and she's just a crazy animal. She really is like a wildcat per se. So it'd be interesting to see how they game plan things now. If she can almost calm herself down a little bit, think about her movement a little bit better, be less rabid, and I think that might help. I honestly don't know what they would do with her if it's 4 losses in a row. I think she may get a pass because she fights once a year or so. I think that's a big part of the problem. I think, if she was to fight consistently and get the ball rolling, a lot of those jitters or nerves or sporadic frequency in the way she fights, I think that would calm down somewhat. So I'm hoping this really gets that ball rolling for her.
And by the way, if she wins, could be a catapult too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're looking for big names. She is one of them.
Especially for her. Because there's a part of, I think, all of us who think she was derailed prematurely because of that Ronda Rousey fight.
Yeah.
I feel like it kind of went this direction, kept waiting for her to go back to this direction, and never got back there.
In 16 seconds.
Yes, exactly. And it
felt fluky. Not that you wouldn't think Ronda would win, but that's not a real representation.
And it still does, to be honest, because we never really got to see. We just saw her, onrush get thrown, and boom, it's over pretty much. So there's a part of me that just feels like we don't know the full story of Kat Zingano. It's still being told, but unfortunately, like you mentioned, the tragic things that have happened outside, and she's went, from travel from Colorado to San Diego. She's tried to find her place within a gym. There's an identity search going on there. There's a lot of things. You talk to her, you realize that she battles a lot of those types of things too. Like she's she's trying to rediscover something that's there. She believes she has it, but she'll tell you that she has it. She'll tell you that, these things are going on, but you need to see it. So I think it really does. This is a big time fight because it'd be very tough, I think, for them to justify keeping around. I think they probably would, though. It's a weird one, depending on how.
I think they would, because she could still go to
depending on how she
145.
yeah.
You never
if she
know.
just looks ineffectual, like she has nothing for Renault, then I would be like, she may be in jeopardy. But you'd like to see a good showing, though, from a competitive standpoint, and maybe just a flash, like you mentioned, of what we know that she has. Those moments where she's had moments in there where she just looks like the best, like
those
a
knees she
world
finished Misha Tate with.
Yeah, that was brutal.
She would finish most men with that. I mean, those were
sure.
phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
So she's shown flashes of incredible brutality. I guess we'll see if she can do it again this weekend. By the way, Marion Renault, not to be trifled with, man. I'm telling you, that is a very, very competitive fight. And honestly, I'm not rooting for one or the other, but if Renault won, it would not surprise me in the least. She is a tough customer. But toughest high school teacher since Jaime Escalante. All right. There are two other names on that card we have to discuss, right? I can't believe I'm giving this much love to Boise, but here we are.
It's actually not a bad card.
Which I'm going to watch because I'm watching Wayne Rooney, DC United. All right. Anyway.
Mentions. This is great.
Yeah, I know. You owe me, DC United. All right. Sage Northcutt. What do you make of his development? He's been sort of taking lightweight bouts. He's back at welterweight, taking on the Barbarian, Zach Otto. How do you view, Chuck, his development? Is it going as expected? Is it going maybe not as expected, but good enough? Where is the question? Where is Sage Northcutt?
Maybe it's finally just on track, because the real thing was initially it was just like he's taking all these fights.
He's been very quiet in the lead up to this fight.
Yeah. It's probably way better. Where he's at now, he's fighting. He's still an intrigue. You see his name, you're like, oh, Sage is fighting, that sort of thing. But he's not getting a spotlight. Like, people aren't just completely focusing on him. I know he's 5-0 as a lightweight and he's 0-2 as a welterweight. The first welterweight fight was the Barbarina one, and it was pretty short notice, right? It was kind of a makeshift sort of situation. So I kind of don't even hold that against him. What I think is he was 19 or whatever he was when he got into this league. He's, what is he now? 21, 22? So it's like he's 22 now.
Drinking every night.
Yes.
I'm sure.
Water. Yeah. But I feel like this is exactly where he should be, is a fight like this at 170, because he's growing. I think that weight cut is probably fairly extreme for him, to get down to. So I almost want to give it the Etch-a-Sketch, to shake it up and let him start and look, see how he looks as a welterweight. And there's some intrigue. I mean, the bottom line is the guy's a freak athlete who's spent his whole life. All those things stay intact, all the original intrigues, but I feel like now maybe he's right where he needs to be.
Copy, paste, send. I feel the exact same way. I like the kid, and I feel that he's just got a great future in martial arts. As a martial artist, I just feel like we put way too much on him right away, and he's still finding himself probably as a person and as a fighter. And I love the welterweight division. The welterweight's a fan favorite for a lot of reasons. It's the speed of the smaller guys and then the power of the bigger guys in one division, and it's always super stacked. So let him grow there, let him learn there, let him become something there, and leave him alone a little bit, right? Just kind of leave him alone and let's see, and just be a fan of his development and the things that he can do. And there was a lot of hate on him too. Now it's just let the kid go.
I have some concerns about his development, because you look at someone like Israel Adesanya, what he can do from fight to fight, and you look at Sage Northcutt. Sure, he's shown development. Team Alpha Male has definitely been good for him, but not in the same degree as perhaps Adesanya. So I do have questions about his ceiling, how high he can go in this sport. Again, he's just 22 years old, so I mean, in 6 years he will be just as old as Adesanya, which is crazy. So you never know.
Wow, Jesus.
Yeah, I think Adesanya's 28, if I'm not mistaken. Right. So you never know with Sage Northcutt. He's still so young, but I would like to see him, as you guys said, leave him alone a little bit, but not only from fans, I guess, heckling him and all that, but also from a promotional standpoint. He's in the co-main event of this card. That's a big spot.
Sage?
Yeah, Sage is in the co-main event, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
I thought he was like the curtain jerker.
No.
Yeah, me too.
I think when I checked the roundup, double check, but I'm pretty sure he's in the co-main event, which that should be a pretty high up spot for someone who you're trying to, breed and race in this promotion. But super technical guy. We can't deny that. His karate background. He's shown to have good wrestling. He's super athletic. He has everything. He just needs to puzzle it together. And with Team Alpha Male, that's a great team to get things going.
I was going to say about that. I think you're right. And you are as well. This is this is sort of a launching off point. I mean, think about one of the 10 best wrestlers of any weight class ever in the history of collegiate wrestling is Ed Ruth. And that dude lives, by choice, on Bellator prelim cards.
Yeah.
And he's older. He's got a much longer athletic career and a super decorated one. And he's like, I don't want any part.
It's like they smuggle him through. Because, I mean, I've been there for a couple of his fights, Ed Ruth, and he... There's no bells and whistles whatsoever. There's hustle him in the lane, and he does this thing, and he's gone before you're like, hey, did Ed Ruth already fought? That's crazy.
Here we go. By the way, UFC Fight Night 133. Let's look at the fight card. You're right. He is the co-main event. Sage Northcutt taking on Zach
Same
Otto.
thing happened to Paige Van Zandt. They were throwing her out there in these big spotlights, you know, and these are fighters that are young and are developing and under pressure. I mean, look at Zingano. We were just talking about him. So I know he's not as young, but, you know, young in his MMA career. So watch out where you place this guy, you know?
All right, now you brought up Israel Adesanya. I'll ask you, Phoenix. I have to say, of all the winners from the International Fight Week, he might be number one. Here's why. Cormier has the 2 belts, all right? That's one thing. But here's the difference. I'm talking about a guy who goes out there and, to your point, fight to fight, is showing like incredible just distance between who he was the fight before. But beyond that, at every single interval of what you ask a fighter to do, he nails every stage. Pre-fight media says all the right things. Gets in the cage, does the right things. Put a microphone in his face, says the right things. Goes and does a media scrum, and he knows people's names and is doing like all kinds of weird
matchmaking.
I've just from pillar to post, he gets everything. Are you as impressed with Adesanya as I am?
I am, and it's because I come from a kickboxing background too, so I had seen him before, and I think that he's just well-groomed. And he also knew how to groom himself. So I work for the LFA and on Access TV, and I interview all these young fighters, and they've got like 3 pro fights, but they want to go to the UFC. And they're winning, have 3 fights, and I want to go to the UFC. And I'm like, do you really though? Don't you want to just kind of learn to even do interviews? So you're trying to interview them and they don't know how to stand still or think of answers or things like that. So grooming yourself on all departments, understanding the fight business is really, really important. And then on top of it, he's a specialist, so he's got beautiful technique. I mean, beautiful, like just running straight down the pipe with the right hand, just the stiff jabs, awesome knees, head kicks. You see things in him that you can see, like, you've really developed your skills and you look good. I mean, he's even done, he's not really merited in this. He didn't come first place, but he's done grappling tournaments as well. So he's taken the time that you need to become what he is becoming.
The zero hesitation thing is kind of like, it's always a marker. You see a guy like, you see Brad Tavares' name, and I remember you talking to Brad Tavares, and I was like, on your radio show, and hearing him speak, and I was like, this is a bad matchup maybe for Adesanya this quickly. I was like, these are the reality fights that they put together, and you're like, this is the dude who could set him back and be like, hey, you're not there yet, young fella. For him to do that to Brad Tavares, who was on the kind of streak he was on and has fought, you know, like the guys he's fought, pretty impressive, man. It was very similar to, you know, you hate to make comparisons until, you know, you just want to give a gauge because they're doing, like he did make an example out of Tavares. But you look at John Jones when he was the escalation when he was going up through the original guys. You wanted to see him against somebody who a little hard, you know. Each time you'd fight a new guy, you're like, well, this could be the guy that's going to give him some trouble, and they weren't doing it yet, you know. But Conor McGregor, same thing. Like he's kind of, it's like the escalation. This would be the guy that brings reality to the situation, and they weren't doing it. You know what I mean? So I feel like he is doing that exactly right. Like so, whatever skeptics are out there, this is how he thrives, right? He's going to show the skeptics that they're morons, and I feel like that's what all these anybody with that it factor basically does.
I know you were singing his praises.
Yeah, I mean, what can you say about the guy? The guy's literally doing everything perfect, and just the fact that he called out Brad Tavares, and a lot of people were like, I don't know about that, and then he goes in there and does what he does, like, it's super impressive. And now he's calling out Paulo Costa, and you know he's
that
making,
fight would be ridiculous.
Yeah, that would be a fun fight, and he's just making all the right moves. But yet again, he goes, "Oh, Robert Whittaker, yeah, he's good, but I'm also coming for him." Like he's setting himself up, putting out sound bites everywhere.
He's the big picture guy. The same thing we were talking about. Yeah. Like he's making sure he's putting fires all over the map right away.
He's planting seeds everywhere, and you know his development. Not only is he doing the media, he's backing. You know, he's talking, which we know sells today, but his development is ridiculous. I personally thought his previous fight against Vittori, right? He showed some issues with his wrestling. You know, a bigger guy was able to control him a bit. So I thought, Brad Tavares is kind of big and he can wrestle. That could be problematic. But he's making so many improvements that he's just, proving people wrong, and that's impressive.
We're short on time, so let's make this a little bit quick. I forgot one guy from the Boise card that I wanted to get to. I'll start down the line. We'll work this way. Chad Mendes comes back. His last fight, 2015. Now, December 2015, but 2015 when he lost to Frankie Edgar. That was supposed to be the moment that launched Frankie Edgar into the stratosphere, and of course, we don't know what happened after that. But my point being is expectations for one Chad Mendes.
Man, because I remember that fight very well, and actually he had a couple of hard fights there at the very end of this chapter of his career. I'm anxious to see, I guess, if maybe this time off was a blessing in disguise, honestly, because he didn't look the same in a couple of those last fights. I feel like when you saw him, coming up all the way into the Aldo fights and all that stuff, he was on a different level. So I just want to see, like, is that the Chad Mendes we get back? Or do you get a guy like this? This whole card, I feel like, is a lot of these types of truth be told type thing.
Yeah, like,
here.
like where you at?
Yeah, exactly. So he's right up there too, in that same sense.
Yeah, I think the same thing. Sometimes a break is really good for somebody if they can really get their head together. It just really depends on what he was doing on that break. Was he healthy? Are they taking care of themselves from the perspective of fight sports? Are we learning enough about the type of breaks that we need, the type of nutrition that we need, the inflammation that you get down, the fear of being back in there? So I think coming back after long periods off and the way you are, that first initial round and your approach to it, it really means a lot for an athlete.
Yeah.
Miles Jury's no joke, by the way.
Yeah.
And he's somewhat in a similar position as well, Miles Jury. But this one's interesting, and I think I'm pretty excited to see Chad Money Mendes back because I think he could be a really fun addition to that featherweight division. Because it seemed like we sort of already knew who the players were, but all of a sudden, hey, look, this guy's a former title challenger. He fought Conor McGregor, he fought Frankie Edgar, Team Alpha Male guys. So I think if he gets a big win here, he's right back in the mix and could set up potential matchups that could be very exciting. I'm curious to see how he looks. It's been a long time since we haven't seen him. He said how he didn't want to go back to MMA. He was tired of the sport, started his own business, is doing well financially. He didn't need MMA. And now he's coming back because he has a competitive edge. And those wrestling guys, they're super competitive. Look at Cormier. And so, I mean, I'm really excited to see him back. And I think, if all things go well for him on Saturday night, I think he could be a big player in the featherweight division.
Can't add much to that. All right, so now here's what we're going to do. We took your questions using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. It'll be time now for After the Beat. I believe you can just stay right here, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Yes, you can. So don't go anywhere. See if your question got picked. We're going to answer those now. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you at After the Beat in just moments. And we're back. All right, welcome everyone. It's time now for After the Beat. Luke Thomas, Danny Segura, Phoenix Carnevale, and of course Chuck Mindenhall there at the end. As I mentioned before, we took your questions using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. Appreciate all the submissions that we got. There was a lot of them you guys can imagine that were redundant for what we were going to talk about. So we did get a lot of submissions. I had to pick the right ones. Which means they're a little bit on the unusual side, if you know what I'm saying. But there's some normal ones as well, and including a surprise name that submitted a question. So without further ado, let's get to it now. Who do we have up first? Oh, I recognize this guy, Jeff Wagenheim.
This guy.
Actually, I don't know who the fuck that is. All right. Okay, hashtag the MMA Beat panel. What's the biggest, most impactful recent signing? LeBron, Ronaldo, or maybe Lesnar? Who wants to field that one? What's the biggest signing of the three?
I'll go first. I'll throw Ronaldo.
All right.
I knew you were going to say
Ronaldo.
Man, he's one of the biggest superstars in the world, one of the biggest athletes in the world. I mean, so is LeBron, of course. But
Same age.
Same age, which is kind of interesting that guys of that stature are moving into different chapters of their lives. But I don't know. We've seen obviously. I don't know much about basketball, but we've seen LeBron switch from other teams. I feel like Ronaldo's identity was so embedded to Real Madrid. I mean, if you look at all the FIFA covers, it's Ronaldo with the Real Madrid jersey. And
Tell me about it.
He was the poster boy. I know you know all about it. So, him leaving to Juventus, especially Juventus, I thought he would go back to like Milan or something. Interesting move. And one that I don't think that many people saw coming because we just saw the World Cup and he was killing it. I think he's still on his prime. So a weird move, but somewhat of an exciting one. How do you feel about that?
About Ronaldo going?
Yeah. Are you
Actually,
sad?
no, not
Lost
really.
sleep?
I think that he's probably got 2 really good seasons left in him.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think he's going to fall off a cliff. And the fact that Mbappe was going to come to Madrid, or at least had considered it before he went to PSG.
He's looked great this World
And
Cup.
yeah, he looks amazing. And the point being is he said no because he thought he'd get more playing time at PSG, meaning Ronaldo had put out this "you're not going to come here" kind of vibe. And I thought his decline, if he had stayed at Madrid, was going to be ugly, super ugly. Now we get to avoid that. We get to rebuild. I don't think Hazard is a meaningful replacement, but if they can get Mbappe, if they can get Neymar, it's going to be another Champions League win for your boys. So we'll see how it goes. But to the question at hand.
So Phoenix, if you didn't know, the After the Beat is designated. It's all about soccer.
It's After
always
the Beat,
about soccer.
aka
These
soccer
guys started like talking about soccer, and I sit over here and was watching them.
And Jeff Wagenheim asked the question.
Yeah, because he knows.
So
He
blame
knows.
him.
He knows the
Do you watch
weaknesses on
soccer at
this
all?
channel.
No?
I only watch combat sports. There's too much combat sports for me to watch anything else anyway.
You sicken me. What about you?
I say LeBron.
LeBron's big,
Only
dude.
because, it's like
LeBron's
Lakers, going to the Lakers, and it's automatic.
The question is what it does for his celebrity.
That's
I
true.
think.
It's true. He's, what is it, 8 straight finals he's been in, and so he just adds that back to the old Showtime Lakers. He goes to the Lakers, and the most hated team of all time.
I know.
I hate that team.
They're gonna be it's like Californians are gonna be like, which bandwagon do we want to jump on? You know?
I think what's cool though is like when you see someone switch from team to team, you see how much impact they actually make on an entire crew of people. So that's kind of interesting.
Also, seeing LeBron give the old Heisman to the ball father is going to be quite a thing I'm going to enjoy. All right, what do we have? Hi, MMA Fighting. This is from a guy whose name I can't read because my vision's fading.
Milo something.
Yeah, doesn't matter. In this era of relatively bad pay-per-view in comparison to UFC 113, for example, can you come up with the main event that breaks 500K? You are not allowed to use the Diaz brothers, Conor, GSP Jones, or Lesnar, nor more than 2 title fights. So you can't use any stars, but you can have 2 title fights. What is the main card or so that gets you 500K? Who wants to field?
Go ahead.
You want to try?
Yeah.
Maybe Cyborg against
Nunes.
Nunes. I mean, that to me, I think they would do that. That's just, but again, we wanted to see Rousey against Cyborg for so long. I don't know if this fight has the exact same magnitude, but I do believe that would be right up there.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you had them as the main event and then Ortega Holloway.
Yeah.
Or you can even think like Khabib Ferguson maybe
Yeah, I was
ever
like, Khabib Ferguson
happening
is good.
ever.
Has the UFC ever considered that matchup a winner?
Yeah, maybe they should book it. That's a good
Hey,
idea.
you know what? Drop dead.
I would actually throw in there Habib and Max Holloway. Those guys were supposed to fight.
Yeah.
There is
That was
some
a
intrigue
brief.
there.
That was a brief fascination, wasn't it? When they were paired, you're like, oh my god, this
Plus,
is.
given his, issues leading up to this fight with Ortega, I think maybe, I don't know, it's possible he goes up to 155.
Yeah.
By the way, just for clarification's sake, UFC 113 was Machida versus Shogun. Shogun winning, so I believe this is the rematch. Josh Koscheck taking on Paul Daly. Sam Stout versus Jeremy Stevens. Kimbo Slice versus Matt Mitrione. And then Patrick Cote versus Alan Belcher.
That's interesting.
That was
And
your
that
main
did
card.
more than 500,000.
I'm not sure what that
Okay.
did on pay-per-view because I'm only looking up here on Google, which I shouldn't be doing. But Tapology will tell you. Oh, you know what? Actually, I can check. Hold on just a second. It did on pay-per-view 520K.
That's pretty amazing.
520K. It's Kimbo Slice, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying he's the sole reason for that, but
There were all names
Used to
that were
distribute
really
our enthusiasms a little differently back then. I really believe that. Like there was multiple intrigues. Now I feel like it's gotten where we pick a star or pick 2 stars and we just really focus on those guys. It's gotta be the other way again.
also that was with a peak of like Canadian market.
Yes, that's
fandom,
true.
You know,
That's true.
And I feel like Canada, which is a North American pay-per-view buying audience, they've kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit, unfortunately.
And also, I don't believe there was nearly as many cards or as much MMA events back then. So
Yeah.
That has a
That
big
as well.
that has a big thing that has something to do with it because people who weren't even big fight fans would go to these fight parties.
Yeah,
true.
Because it was a little event.
It used to be an event.
Yeah.
You know. Now you got 2 Bellators, a UFC
I
this
know.
weekend.
We didn't get to it on the rundown because we just ran out of
Two
time.
Bellators this week.
Bellator has 2 events this weekend. Literally 2. Can you name one fighter competing?
Michael McDonald.
Okay, Mayday's competing. Can you name anyone?
Dantas.
Patricio Freire.
Who's he fighting?
Weichel, is that
Daniel
it?
Weichel, yes. And what city?
Part 2. It's one of the Daniels against one of the
in what
Patricio. Somewhere in Rome, right?
Yeah, it's Rome. All right, well, you got them all. Well, F you.
It's in Rome.
You know everything.
It is
Well,
Rome.
can I ask, has the UFC ever gone to Rome? Has they ever
I
gone
don't think
to
they've gone
Italy?
to Italy, period.
So I think that one of the reasons, maybe there's two, is that if Bellator is trying to be smart and go into more of this European market where nobody ever goes or nobody's been before, that might be the reason. I'm very confused with Bellator because it's good. Is it like DAZN?
It's DAZN.
Really?
Which is
I
the
was like,
worst name ever.
I was like, is this another member of the Wu-Tang Clan? Like, what is the? I don't know where I'm watching this.
DAZN.
Heavily invested in
Let it be known.
Sakara, man.
Sakara's fighting.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the weirdest thing.
I
Like,
get the
they-
one in Rome because, as you mentioned, it's an
Right.
untapped market, and I think they make big money on those shows. But then it's the one you're putting Mayday McDonald in Thackerville on a Friday night with no promotion. There must be some kind of strategy. I just don't know what it is.
It's a women's featherweight title.
Julia Budd's fighting, yeah.
Yes, but that I'm interested in.
Okay, I mean that's.
Sean
you know.
Grandy is going to be
Yeah.
back on the mic.
Is he?
Yeah. Just for that event.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
You know what?
Now I'm getting you excited. Now you want to watch.
Now I'll watch. Hashtag I don't like the Celtics though. All right, what do we have next? Okay, if both TJ and DJ win at UFC 227 August 4th, do you think they will fight each other, Danny Segura?
I would say no.
Oh, why not?
I don't know. I really don't think TJ can make 125.
Oh, I bet he can.
And if he does, I don't know. There's so many hurdles on that.
The question is not whether he can make it. The question is who is he at that weight?
Right. That's true as well. I would say no, but I think it's possible.
Thank you for reiterating the obvious. You think it's possible? Yeah, of course it's possible.
Well, I would go with no.
Okay, you go with no. All right.
I'm just tired of thinking about the fight. Like, it's one of those weird ones that are like we've kind of been brushing on this, and there's always some obstacle in the way. So I hope it happens. You know, it's one of those fights I wanted to see this time through. If they both come out, you know, it has a little more momentum behind it, I'm all for it. I would love to see it. I just don't know if it'll happen.
Thank you, Danny Segura,
Yes.
for that answer.
I think
Phoenix?
I think it should, because after this, what can DJ say is the reason that he won't fight him? You know what I mean? And if he does create a contract where TJ doesn't get to that weight, he can protect himself financially. If that is the issue,
But hold on, just play devil's advocate. Won't DJ say what he's always been saying, which is, "I'll do that, but you got to pay me more."
right. And so what? Why not? Right? It's going to be a super fight. Then maybe then he should be paid more.
Look at the Stipe Miocic, Daniel Cormier. How much? I mean, that was a super fight.
Right.
They had the heavyweight allure. Two guys that are, you know, fairly big draws, right? Demetrius Johnson, maybe not so much. He doesn't have that heavyweight allure. TJ Dillashaw, same thing. You know, there's not that much on the line. So if that did less than 400,000, maybe DJ probably doesn't do as much. So I don't know if the UFC is gonna take out their checkbook and write something to make DJ want to fight TJ.
Yeah, that's my sense.
That's where I'm at.
My sense is that TJ might force it, but what if Cody wins? In which case, God only knows what's going to. But the question is, if Cody wins,
Cody's also talked about fighting Demetrius.
okay, but hold on. If Cody wins, does that make TJ dropping less or more likely? Because there's two ways to look at it. One, you could say is, well, he may not get a rubber match. Are they really going to do a rubber match back to back to back? They might. I mean, but I don't know. But you could also say, well, screw it. I want to go down to 125. I've lost now. Let's see if I can go get another title in another weight class.
I think that's what he would do,
Yeah.
because nobody was really clamoring for this fight either. You know, everybody likes Cody Garbrandt,
Right.
but it was, you know, we felt that he had the back injury. Maybe he should have fought somebody before he went to TJ anyway. I would have preferred that. But so I think maybe that's where he goes, because he really wants to prove that he can get to that weight in the first place. So that might be a smart move.
By the way, you have Dominic Cruz said on Monday he thinks that Cody wins.
Yeah.
Could be kind of interesting. So we'll see what happens. All right, we're plowing through these. Jesus. Who has the best walkout in UFC history? This person says, mine is Weidman on Long Island.
I was there.
How was that? Was that the best one in UFC history? That makes me hard. That's hard to
No,
believe.
but it was a great walkout because the Long Island crowd really felt like it was like a home game. Like it was just like Weidman was even talking about it at the post-fight conference when he beat Gastelum, where he was like, "Yeah, like I was seeing people from my old high school and whatnot, and it really, I don't know, there was something fun about that. That was a pretty good walkout."
Did you get lice in Long Island?
I did not.
Oh, sorry. What am I saying? That's Newark. Never mind. I apologize. Sorry, Long
Here
Island.
he goes.
As far as walkouts, I really like Akiyama's.
Oh, with Conte Partiro.
Yeah, that's
the song,
amazing.
yeah.
That's amazing. And he bows down and he's holding the hands.
Oh,
of
and
the team.
I'll tell you, I got a soft spot for anybody who comes out in the gi.
Yeah.
You know, and
too.
they're doing the band because they always come out with like these $500,000 freshest gis. I mean, these are things that are right out of the bag. You know, I really like it. I got a soft spot for that. So I mean, I won't say I like St. Pierre's entrances per se, but what he was wearing on the entrance, I really liked. What about you, Chuck?
Those were always big. Man, I was trying to think. If you're just talking about ones that are memorable, I always loved John Fitch, who was always coming out to, you know, Rusty Cage. It always seemed cool, like a perfect walkout song. But the guy he fought, was it Gono? Who did he fight that
Akihiro
time?
Gono.
Yeah, and he came out wearing
Gono
the
always
gowns.
did fun stuff, yes.
I mean, those days were fun when the guys could do that sort of thing. And
Here's the sad reality. If you missed Pride, you missed all the best
Yeah, I know.
walkouts.
That's
I just don't know what to tell you.
That is
Like,
true.
you missed them all. All those opening sequences where the guys were wearing the thongs and banging on the drums and
Anderson doing Michael Jackson.
I forgot about
Yeah.
that. I will say shouts to James Tahuna, who did the Men in Black thing
Yeah,
before
right.
he
That was
fought
cool,
Nate
yeah.
Marquardt.
Yeah.
That was a big one, right?
That was in Australia,
I
right?
not
Australia or
remember
New
that.
Zealand. You
Yeah.
ever saw that?
yeah,
I don't remember
This
that.
is before the UFC decided, like, there's no fun allowed here.
I'll tell you what, man, when Anderson Silva was on his run, and it was one of those situations where each time you're like,
DMX
this could be it.
Yeah.
Like, every time he walked out, the place was it was crazy in those arenas, man. Saw him at UFC 134 in Brazil, and that was a really nutty atmosphere, but it didn't matter if it was Vegas or where he was. I remember in Columbus when he was fighting Dan Henderson. It just seems like when they start his music, you felt like you're watching this like legend come out, and just those types of things I miss. You know, like he just seemed like that at the time.
I'm surprised you guys aren't mentioning the back in the day when they still had the ramp. Tito Ortiz coming out the Limp Bizkit.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
Who doesn't love that?
Biscuit, oh.
There's a
Making
couple
me
other ones
feel
that are.
so old.
I know, believe me. There's a couple other ones that like sort of really stand out to me. Rashad Evans, before he fought John Jones, came out to Immortal Technique, and he had the. Do you guys remember Rashad used to come out with a towel over his head a little bit, so you could kind of just see his eyes a little bit, and they're really dark and everything and brooding. That's a great one. I don't know about UFC history. I've always liked it Bernard Hopkins is now known as the Alien, which I hate. He's retired, but when he was known as the Executioner, and you come out with the Executioner mask, your boy used to get sized for that. In fact, if you go to the Newseum, which is it's a museum about the history of news, it's not free. You have to pay to get in. It's in D.C. But one of the things that they have is a gallery that's nothing but the most iconic sports portraits. And there's one of Bernard Hopkins wearing the Executioner mask.
Cool.
And there's this green light behind him that the promoter put up. It is, and they have it as the size of this wall. And it is, you look at it, man, it is spellbinding to look at something like that.
awesome.
All of Mayweather's entrances with like Bieber and Burger King and Lil Wayne, they all sucked. I will say shouts to Conor McGregor when he came out to Sinead O'Connor,
Yeah.
the Foggy Dew thing. Incredible.
Well, as a female, I have to say this, and it is iconic, and it was big for any women in sports. Rhonda, and that song is
Bad
now,
Reputation?
is synonymous with her. And when she came out for the Hall of Fame, and that song came on, you know, whatever thoughts you have about Ronda Rousey or whatnot, there was a moment in me. What was UFC 135? Was her first UFC, I think.
34 maybe?
And it just felt like, this. Every time I hear this, I will think of that serious look on her face and, you know, her running out and just sort of an iconic moment in sports. And that song is now more synonymous with her than it is by itself.
UFC 157, the Carmouche one. Is
Yes.
The first one,
Yeah.
How about all the old Vanderlei walkouts with Darude's A Sandstorm?
Oh, Sandstorm, yeah.
I would never, I would never listen to Sandstorm under any other
know.
consideration.
That's so true.
Other than to watch Vanderlei go fuck somebody
I
up.
will say that Chris Weidman's, when he first fought Silva, was pretty
Yeah, that
electric
one was
because there was something about that matchup that seemed very, very vulnerable for
Right.
Silva, and they cued his music and he started coming out, and you're like, this could be it.
How about
it
this?
felt like that.
We're not even mentioning it. How about Matt Hughes, Country Boy Can't Survive?
yeah.
Because here's the truth. Everyone comes out to like, see now you had like Dan Henderson or Johnny Hendricks. They'd come out to like this honky-tonk country music. And it's like the worst possible choices. But he came out to like this brooding Hank Williams. And this, which is
some beach nut in that.
that dude's shooting with all 45, which is like a little bit angry, and I really loved it. Are there any other songs that when you think of them, think of a fighter?
You mentioned Dan
California
Henderson.
Love.
California Love,
yeah.
great call,
100%.
great call.
You mentioned Dan Henderson. The first time I ever saw him walk out at 82, where I was in the building against Anderson Silva, they played what's the wrestling move from the 80s? You know what I'm talking about?
Are you asking me that question?
The
For
wrestling
real?
movie
Yeah,
from the
it was,
80s?
Like No Holds Barred with Hulk Hogan?
Lunatic Fringe. They played the Lunatic Fringe, and it was perfect because it was this wrestling tribute, and I thought, Dan Anderson gets it, man. Like, everybody was all in on it, and then I realized that Dana assigned that to him. It wasn't his, and then he started going with all that country stuff.
okay.
But at the time, I remember thinking, that's the best association I've ever seen for a walkout, you know?
I'm a little disappointed in you.
Why? What are you gonna throw out there?
I can't believe because hold on, okay. So I'm not religious. I don't care. I mean, I hear Christian music and I actually want to die. I mean, if you hear if I get an Uber and the guy's playing gospel, I'm like, just call it a day, bro. Just drop me off. I don't care if we're on the highway. Drop me off. I don't want to hear it. However, there is one, and I do mean one exception to the rule, and I get on my feet when I hear it because the artist, he has like a series of Christian albums, and then he's got a bunch of albums that have nothing to do with that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It's going to go Romero?
Juan Luis Guerra.
Yeah, Juan Luis Guerra.
And he
that
has,
was a good one. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, he comes out to soldado, which means soldier in Spanish.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I don't care. I can show you my playlist. I've got a gazillion. Dominican merengue. Your boy gets moving, dude. There is something about it, man. I'm
And
telling you.
dancing on the way. Yeah.
Oh, he's coming out, and you hear it, and you hear the drum line coming out, and I'm like, you know what? All right, I love this. Every time I hear any kind of Juan Luis Guerra, I like that, dude. That is an incredible.
that is a good walkout for sure.
Someone has to carry the torch here. All right.
You can do it.
Let's see. What do we have next? All right. Since Louis Ngannou was a stinker for the ages, what are some of the Louis Ngannou?
Yeah, I'm kidding.
Did I say it wrong?
No.
Was a stinker for the ages. What are some of the other fights that you guys highly anticipated would end up being a dud? Jeez. You know what I'll say? I won't say it was a dud because that's unfair. But Forrest Griffin, Stephen Bonner 2 just was not even approximating what the first one was.
Well, it's incomparable to the first one. That it's so hard to match that, you know?
Same thing with Sonnen and Silva, too. Because the first one was like this epic change of the, in the fifth round. The second one was, I thought it was so anticlimactic. It was like,
it felt good up until it just didn't. Once the spinning back fist, you're like, really? You know?
Maybe the Houston Alexander Kimbo one, right?
Oh, that one was.
Remember that one? Like it was.
Isn't that the one where Houston got slammed?
No, I thought that they just kind of
just leg kicked him.
Yeah, they just.
There was maybe one.
I could have
slam.
sworn Kimbo slammed him.
No, there was a slam for like a brief second. Yeah.
That might have happened, but the fight on whole was very, very anticlimactic. You thought there was a similar thing where you thought these guys are going to go in there and.
I mean, that was Houston Alexander's last fight in the UFC.
Yeah,
I think.
exactly.
Yeah.
I can think of two.
All right.
When Anderson fought Damian Maia, and he like messed around and played around, I was so annoyed. And I totally loved Anderson Silva, my favorite fighter. Yeah, I was like, what are you doing? I was so mad. And then I also, and this is neither fighter's fault, was Wonder Boy and Woodley. And it was just because of their styles.
The second one?
The second one, yeah. And it was just their styles and the tentativeness and whatnot. And it was like, oh man, I love them both so much and I know what they can both do. And yet I'm waiting. And so I felt that way about those two fights.
I don't know if this one was much of a surprise, but like it was a huge fight, Nick Diaz versus GSP, the whole build up, and it was so much.
See, I knew that one was going to be a stinker.
And when it came,
you knew St. Pierre was going to wrestle him. You knew it.
Yeah.
Right.
But just given the promotion and the big fight feel, it just came up short. It really wasn't much.
I'm trying to think of some other ones that were like hotly anticipated and they just didn't live up to the hype.
Gray Maynard, Clay Guida.
I don't even remember it.
Oh, that was the one at the Revel.
Yeah.
That was the one at Revel.
Yeah.
That one made like big headlines because of how boring it was.
Also, Nate Diaz, Gray Maynard, I don't think was all that great in the end, right? UFC Fight Night 20, it was in Fairfax, Virginia.
They fought twice or once?
This was the first one. If they fought twice, I can't even remember.
They did.
The last one,
they fought
Nick
a
Diaz
second
finished
time.
him.
Yeah, Diaz beat.
Yeah, that's right. This was the first one. It ended up being not all that great in the end. I don't know. Any other ones? Yes,
I was trying to think of the really big ones. I know there's been a couple. I just can't.
There's some that they both were like, "Oh, this is going to suck." You're like, "Yeah, it sucks in the end." But
it's hard though when there's a big expectation that it's going to be a good fight, and it just turns out to be the opposite.
I don't know what
I feel like we're missing one.
We definitely are.
Pedro Hizo versus Rico Rodriguez ended up being terrible, and that was Rico right off of Pride, and Pedro still was, I think, a big commodity then. That one sucked big time. Anyway.
Yeah. Nothing that I can recall, though, were two guys. It just seemed inevitable that those guys would put on a good fight, Louis and Ngannou.
Yeah.
So I can't think of any that was just the opposite of what you're expecting, just like that.
Yeah. All right. What do we have next? What 3 fighters would you want by your side during a zombie apocalypse? All right, you want to go first, Phoenix?
Yes, and I don't know why I can't think of his name right now because I'm a big fan, but he's military.
Tim Kennedy?
Tim Kennedy. Hell yeah, I would want to be with Tim Kennedy in a zombie apocalypse. Frankie Edgar, because I just love him, and I just think that no matter what happens, he could be like a zombie and come back and just like.
Yes.
And then I think maybe Cyborg because
It's not a bad one.
you know I think she would be great in an action movie.
All right, what about you, Chuck? 3 fighters.
Jim Miller, because he's an outdoorsman, you know how to make like.
That's right.
Yeah,
Country boy can't
Yes,
survive.
That's great.
Man.
I'll go Frank Mir. He's a weapons specialist.
Yeah.
Oh, good one.
We'll go Frank Mir, weapons specialist. I would also go Fedor, because he doesn't crack under pressure. You'd be all these zombies knocking at the door.
He won't get on your nerves either because he's not going to say a lot.
And I would say Nate Diaz, we just smoke it out before we die.
I was thinking about Nate Diaz. At least you'd be around some fun company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Slapping zombies. That'd be great.
Stockton slap us on. Yeah.
What are we talking about? This is not what I thought it was going to happen this morning.
This is the dumbest show in America, just so you know.
I would throw in there Valentina Shevchenko,
Not a bad one.
weapons specialist.
Yes, you know
Oh,
what?
that's right.
Good call. Her and her sister.
Totally
Yeah.
forgot about that too.
Her and her sister on their Instagram, it's just them traveling, shooting at ranges,
And dancing.
and eating food.
Yeah.
That is like their lives. So you're right.
Perfect.
She would be perfect for
Perfect.
I'll
that.
throw in there Valentina Shevchenko. Tim Kennedy's not a bad choice. Who else? James Vick hunts, right? He can
Yes.
do some hunting.
Although he hunts with an AR-15, which I was like, you know, I never heard of something like
Yikes.
that.
Who else? Demetrius Johnson. You want to have somebody agile.
Yeah, but that's
fast.
video game killing he does.
No, but
Might
just
transfer over.
Oh, you mean like
his
physically
abilities.
he's quick?
Yeah,
Oh,
he's
yeah.
quick. You know, say like, I don't know.
So I was thinking
watch a lot of-
who's a good weapons person.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but you also want to, think of different
a lot of them.
scenarios, situations. Where you can
I know. It's like how many? Here's a question.
Like Matt Hughes used to always be like posing with like animal
I know.
kills, remember?
How many MMA fighters do you know who don't shoot guns on their Instagram? Like virtually none. Right?
There's a few, yeah.
Not many.
Not many.
The overwhelming majority is like, here's me at the gun range shooting,
Yeah.
fucking Mark 19 butterfly trigger grenade launcher. It's like, okay. See, I did all that stuff. It's not as cool as they make it sound.
Well,
but-
Forrest Griffin, didn't you have a book by this?
Oh, Chad Mendes.
Oh, Jesus Christ, I think you're right. I think he has a book on surviving the zombie
Yeah.
I'm trying to say,
apocalypse.
so maybe you'd want to go with a guy who actually
Yeah.
wrote the book.
Yeah.
And he's funny. He'd
Knows
be
how to
funny
fish,
around.
hunt,
Yeah?
Survival, good
Chad
survival.
Mendes is a good call, too. I would be a terrible call, but let's keep going. All right. Is Yoel Romero the one to get DC back down to 205? DC says he only wants big fights, and Yoel's talking trash, building hype, Chuck Mindenhall.
Man, I have not contemplated this, but
See, I think I love this fight, and I'll
Yeah.
tell you why. I don't think DC would take it, but you got DC down at 205, who's very, very good, but we know that's not his optimal weight. His optimal weight is now heavyweight, right? We can pretty firmly establish that. But now you have to ask yourself, how much are Yoel's cardio issues at age 40, 41 a function of him trying to get to middleweight? So now he's up at a good weight class for him. And you would have to imagine some of that wrestling would be negated. And Yoel Romero can thump, boy.
I know.
So now you're saying to yourself, I like that one.
I know.
I like that one
I
a
was just
lot.
going through the same.
And you get to hear some soldado. Like, I'm all there. What do you think?
I want him at that weight class.
Yeah?
I just
205?
I just want to see it, and I think he ends out his career without trying to kill himself with the weight, and just see where he can go with that. I mean, how many more fights can he really? How many more fights do you think?
Yeah, I'd like to see him.
At middleweight, you mean, or just in total?
I think in total,
Right.
age-wise, I mean, of course he looks amazing. He's learned how to use his energy systems properly, but without that vicious weight cut, like how would he perform?
I'd like to see him try out light heavyweight just to see how he looks. But he's made middleweight a bunch of times and has been, the times he's failed, there's always been some sort of.
I know, but the question is, like, what's the athletic trade-off at this point?
Right, that's what I
Yeah.
want to see. Go have a one-off, sort of like when Anderson Silva was going up to light heavyweight. See how you look, and if you look better and feel better, stay there. But that is an interesting fight. I don't think DC would take it because I don't think it's big enough. I think Yoel Romero, for the hardcores, it is. But from a casual perspective, pay-per-view selling, I don't think it does the job.
Well, it does the job for me.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I'll tell you that.
Hearing you run it down, honestly, I hadn't really contemplated this fight, but
It's partly speculative. I don't know how much better he
Yeah.
looks at light heavyweight, but boy, you got to think, man.
And also, like, guys his size have had success at light heavyweight. I mean, Cormier's probably just as tall as he is, probably like 5'11", 5'10".
I think Cormier is shorter.
Maybe shorter. I mean, Ilir Latifi has a similar build to Yoel Romero, and he's destroying guys up there, so wouldn't be a bad move.
make it happen, UFC.
Yeah. What are you waiting on, Daniel? All right, that's it. We're done? No mas? Wow, I can't believe that. There you go. See, Phoenix? It's the dumbest show in America, isn't it?
Fun. I had fun.
There we go. All right. We appreciate everybody tuning in. Thank you so much. We are off next week, but then we're back. Well, okay. If major news breaks, we're back next week. But we're off next week, and then we'll be back the week after that to get ready for UFC Calgary, which is going to be a banger of a card. I cannot possibly wait any more for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. For Chuck, Phoenix, Danny, I'm Luke. Hands up, chin down, let them fly. This is the MMA Beat.